Just a heads up, this video touches on subjects that might be difficult for sensitive people. Viewer discretion is advised. Having said that, my thoughts on the recent passing of Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a while since I've made a YouTube video. I've been very busy working on my opening Explorer. Check it out at www.jimmyvermeer.com/cgi-bin/oe.cgi. After I heard about what happened to Daniel Naroditsky, I felt I had to make a video about it. As you've probably heard by now, 29-year-old Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, also known as Dania, was found dead in his apartment by Charlotte Chess Center founder Peter Giannatos and fellow chess player Grandmaster Alexander Bortnik, who later confirmed that Dania's death was a suicide, according to unknown sources. On the record, the cause of death is unknown, but off the record, it was totally a suicide. In the wake of Dania's passing, it seems a lot of righteous anger is being directed at former world champion Vladimir Kramnik. I know it's very sad to hear of something like this, and there's always more to the story. I'm not sure I have all the facts myself. In fact, I know for a fact I don't have all the facts. What I do know is that over the course of the last 2 years, Dania was faced with baseless accusations of cheating coming from former world champion Vladimir Kramnik. It all started when Dania defeated Kramnik in a blitz game by playing moves that Kramnik didn't anticipate. But that's just how you win at chess. It doesn't mean he cheated. Kramnik just couldn't accept the fact that he lost to a man 20 years younger than himself. But Dania wasn't the only one. Kramnik has been throwing around accusations at all kinds of random people. Because, I don't know, maybe he thinks the accusations are true. And maybe in a small percentage of cases it was true. I don't think Dania cheated. I don't think Kramnik being suspicious is evidence enough that someone cheated. It's a very serious accusation and should not be made lightly. Those of you who are more than 22 years old will remember that Kramnik himself was accused of cheating during his World Championship match against FIDE World Champion Veselin Topalov. For those who don't remember, I'll bring you up to speed on basically what happened. Kramnik was apparently drinking a lot of water during the match because he was understandably nervous. As a result, he had to make frequent trips to the toilet. The accusation was that while he was in the washroom, he was using a computer to cheat. You can enter a board position into a chess engine, and the engine works for a few seconds or a few minutes, depending how deep you want the analysis to go, and tells you what it has calculated to most likely be the best move. Since the bathroom was the only part of that building that wasn't under constant video surveillance, for obvious reasons, the accusations were impossible to prove in this case. FIDE introduced a rule that players had to be supervised during their bathroom breaks, so they couldn't cheat. Kramnik refused to accept this new rule, and as a result he was forfeited for one game in the match before the new rule was scrapped. Oh, and by the way, Kramnik also got in trouble recently with chess.com for playing on someone else's account, which of course he knew full well was a big no-no and an actual violation of chess.com's fair play policies. There have been other players who were expelled from tournaments due to cheating when a phone was found in the bathroom that had computer analysis showing of positions that came up in games they were playing. Perhaps this incident was the start of Kramnik's so-called villain arc. Every single adult person in the world has been bullied at some point in their life. Every single person has been slandered and falsely accused of something or another. It happens all the time. But different people have different reactions to all the slander, harassment, and bullying. And you have to be aware of how people will react when you say these things about them. When you talk about suicide, one person who comes to mind is my good friend Jonathan Conti, a fellow intactivist who took his own life 9 years ago. Like others who made the choice that he made, Jonathan Conti was also harassed and bullied, but by his own parents. The people who worked hard to bring him into the world and then raise him to be an adult. And since he was an activist, they must have done something right to instill in him a sense of right and wrong, to have the courage to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. But they didn't see it that way, and they chose instead to shame and ridicule their own son because they didn't agree with his politics. And because they chose this route, they now have a dead son. Jonathan Conte's death was met with mixed reactions, some bemoaning his fate and others applauding him for having the courage to do the one thing that just might awaken his parents to the realization that what they were doing was causing real harm in multiple ways. I personally do not think he should have committed suicide. I think he could have done a lot more for the cause if he chose to continue living. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have sons, or even daughters for that matter, be kind to them, don't bully them, and don't circumcise them. But enough about that. This video is about Daniel Naroditsky. It would appear that the primary instigator of Daniel's death was Vladimir Kramnik, a Russian grandmaster who was once world champion. Kramnik was someone that Daniel looked up to. There were photos of Daniel and Kramnik together when Daniel was just a little kid and Kramnik was the world champion. And when the person you admire most in the world viciously turns against you like that, I can imagine it must have a terrible effect on your psyche. Perhaps Daniel cared too much what Kramnik thought of him. When Vladimir Kramnik started making accusations against people like Hikaru Nakamura, for example, I think most people, myself included, did not take the accusations seriously and just thought Kramnik was being crazy. But it hits differently when you're the subject of the accusations and the person doing the accusing is a highly respected former world champion in the very sport that you love and have dedicated your life to. For those who don't know, Daniel Naroditsky was the youngest person to author a chess book, having authored his first book at the age of 13 and his second by the time he was 16. He was one of the youngest Americans to become a grandmaster at the age of 17. He was consistently in the top 200 chess players in the world, and he had a YouTube channel where he taught people about chess. Kind of like me, but better. I hope to one day be as big as he was in the chess community. This brings me to my next point. Emil Sutovsky, the president of FIDE, put out a tweet in the wake of this tragedy, in which he clumsily tried to show some sympathy about what happened, but in the process pointed his accusing finger at Daniel's friends and family, the very people who were closest to him and loved him dearly, the people who were most devastated by his loss, and asked them why they didn't do more to show love and support to Daniel during what was clearly a difficult time in his life. Pardon my drench, but who the duck does he think he is? Blaming people he doesn't even know for a tragedy that deeply impacted them. Talk about adding insult to injury, pouring salt on a wound, whatever. Can you imagine if someone said that to me shortly after Jonathan Conte committed suicide? I loved the heck out of that guy, but it was impossible to see the warning signs that he was having suicidal thoughts. Duck that guy. Sutovsky, I mean. And by duck, I mean another word that sounds sort of like duck. I just don't want my video to get banned or age restricted or something. Kramnik also tweeted something about Daniel after news broke of his death. He basically denied any responsibility for any role he may have played in Daniel's death, denied having ever harassed him, and then in the very next sentence continued to push the narrative that Daniel likely cheated. But come on. A young man just died, most likely because of you, and you're going to tweet stuff like that? And on top of that, Kramnik even went on to say that he was a better friend to Daniel than any of his friends that he was close with. Kramnik tried to make it out that he was the only person who saw the warning signs that Daniel was having mental issues, and he was the only person who tried to get Daniel the help he needed. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Kramnik was the primary instigator behind what happened to Daniel, and his other friends did reach out to him in the final days of his life to encourage him to get some much-needed rest and get his mind off of all the bullshit coming from Kramnik. By the way, Vladimir Kramnik has said that he would sue anyone who suggests that he in any way had anything to do with Daniel's death. And so to that I say, come at me, bro. Some people in their righteous rage against Kramnik have suggested that he should be stripped of his title as former world champion and grandmaster, among other things. For the most part, I think chess world champions are wonderful people, with only a few exceptions, Kramnik obviously because of recent events. But what about Bobby Fischer, who in his final years of mental decline dedicated his life to anti-Semitism, despite having a Jewish mother? And Alexander Alekhin, who allegedly was a Nazi sympathizer during World War II. I'm not sure how I feel about erasing history, even though I strongly disagree with the views of some former world champions. Where do you draw the line? In what way, if any, should Vladimir Kramnik be punished for the role he may have played in Dania's death? Do you think a comparison can be made to Magnus Carlsen's suspicions about Hans Niemann? Let me know in the comments what you think.